to him. And, in verse 10 of chapter 10, it says, "Suddenly a hand touched me, and which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hand, and said, 'O Daniel, greatly beloved, and understand the words I speak to you, and stand upright for what I have been sent to you, for I have now been sent to you.' While he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. And then he said, 'Do not fear, Daniel. For from the first day that you set your heart to understand, to humble yourself before the Lord God, I have come because of your words.'" And then he goes on until verse 14. He says, "Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come." And so he lays this out before him. And then in verse 19 he says, "O man, greatly beloved, fear not, peace to you, and be strong, yes, be strong." So he gets strengthened, he gets, and then he's been given this incredible prophecy. And Daniel 11, I don't know, when people talk about the great prophecies of the Bible, Daniel 11 isn't always included in that list. And I really don't know why, because it is probably one of the most explicit of the prophecies that you can trace through history. Now, it's so good that a lot of people will look at this and say, hey, this is not necessarily a prophecy. It's written in the 2nd century, and they look at Daniel 11 and say, nobody can be this clear and this precise written beforehand. It cannot happen. And then in verse 36 of Daniel 11, it all of a sudden pulls out. It's extremely specific, and we'll look at all the little details because I think it's just amazing. Because the Bible tells us in Isaiah 42, he says, "Behold, the former things have come to pass, and now and new things I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them." And so there in the Old Testament, we're told, God says, "I'm telling you these things beforehand." In fact, he challenges other gods to tell them, these idols, or the idols of the people, saying, ask them to tell you the future. And they can't tell you this future. They're dumb idols and things. And he goes, "I tell you the future because I want you to know." Jesus said something similar as well. He says, "Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he." And he's talking about the fact that he's going to be betrayed. And so he says the very same thing as the Spirit says to Isaiah in the Old Testament. "I'm telling you these things so that you will know and that you'll be secure. You'll know where you are, what's going on. You'll understand that God's in control." And I think that's really important to have that in our minds, because he's talking about stuff that's going to relate to the nation. Now he said in verse 14 of chapter 10, "I'm telling you these things, what's happening in the latter days. For the vision refers to many days yet to come." And so he's going to lay this out. Now, much of it has to do with the Greeks that are going to come and what they're going to do. Now, it's been several weeks now, but if you go back to chapter 8, you had the vision of the goats and the goat and the ram, and how the ram was in verse 5. It says, "And I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and a goat had a notable horn between its eyes. And then he came at the ram and had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power." And it goes on, and I don't want to go back over all of that again, but this is sort of a bird's eye picture of this whole battle between Persia and Greece. And he sort of looks at it that way. And I'm sure it was spoken when we went over that, about the fact that that's exactly how the Greeks beat the Persians, was that it was their speed that did it. When they were battling when the Persians came twice they came at them so fast that they weren't prepared for it and all the rest. So it's exactly like he said. Now, as we look at this, there's a lot of detail in this, and I don't usually do this, but I actually printed out my notes. I don't usually actually use notes. I usually just use the PowerPoint stuff. But in this particular case, I wish I could say this is all my stuff, But it ain't. I didn't read. I don't read Greek. I didn't read Herodias, who actually talked about this, where all these guys got it from. I got it from Walvoord and Guzik and some of the other guys there. One of the guys I think is great if you like this kind of stuff, which I do. there's a guy called Tom Holland. He's on here. He wrote a book called Persian Fire, which talks about the Persian Empire. Then he wrote another book about the Romans. He wrote another book about the Greeks. He wrote about the Muslims and the rise. And he's an incredible writer. And it's not just this boring history. It's really good stuff. So you might want to look at that. So I'll just give these to you, and you can pass these around. Now, these are my notes, so they probably won't actually make any sense to you at all. But you might be able to follow along. I was going to put it all up on the screen, but it's just so much and so much detail. Because when we look at Daniel 11, remember, he is writing in 539. That's when Daniel 11 is taking place, in 539 BC. And so he's writing this in 539, and is at the top of that page as it comes around, it lays out the dates of these different it can't be 539, these different dates that are there. He's writing about this stuff that's coming before. And what's amazing about it, he's writing at the time of the Persians. He's writing long before the Greeks really had any idea that they would become this world power. They were city-states at the time. They were powerful. They were strong. They had incredible armies, but they had no inclination, it looked like, that they were going to take over the world, the known world. At that time, there was no chance of it. So let's read from Daniel, and then we'll go over the history. Because as I said, he is writing long before this took place. And he's writing in such detail that, again, it just looks like he's writing from the after the effect. But in verse 1 of chapter 11, he says, "Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood up to confirm and strengthen him." So again, he's talking, the angel's talking here, "And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece." So he lays it out there in verse 2, where he speaks about these different kings that will come. And they're listed here. And anybody want to have a go at it? Cambyses, I don't know, Pseudo, Smerdis, Darius, I got that one, and Xerxes, Artaxerxes in number 2. So there's more of them that actually are listed here, because there was actually more kings than just these 4, but there were 4 that had something to do with the nation of Israel and what sort of led to it. There were some after Xerxes. He was the one that sort of at the pinnacle of power. He was the one, as it says here, that by his great strength and through his riches, he stirred up against them the realm of the Greeks. And so he was the one who really caused the trouble. He was the one, if you know the story of Xerxes, if you've ever watched the movie 300, anybody seen that movie? That's what that movie's about. It's not necessarily true, but it's close. Where the Greeks held off this incredible army of the Persians that were coming at them. And what happened is that Xerxes, he was this guy that thought he was a god, and he got to the sea between Turkey and well, it's Turkey and Turkey, but at that time it was Turkey and Greece. And he built a bridge across it, and there was a big storm that destroyed the bridge. And because of that, he killed all the architects who built the bridge, and then he actually said the water itself should have 300 lashes for disobeying him. I mean, that's kind of this guy, this power that he thought he had. And so he ruled all the way from India all the way over to Greece, and he was going to then take on the Greeks as well. His 10 years before, and Darius had tried to come against the Greeks, and he had failed as well. So this has already happened once, and now it's going to happen again as Xerxes comes across. And that's exactly what took place. These 4 kings came, and then after them, Artaxerxes, who's in Ezra. Some of these guys are listed in the Bible. Some of them don't really have anything to do with the Bible. They're not mentioned in it in a sense, and so they're not necessarily listed in Ezra or whatever. But Xerxes was the one that he was the pinnacle of power, and he was the one that sort of caused the trouble, that stirred up the Greeks against them, and then brought the Greeks down when Alexander the Great came. And so this is exactly what took place. From that time, there were 4 more kings, and it was the last one, Xerxes, who was incredibly wealthy. He came against the Greeks. He lost the battle, and he stirred the Greeks to come and get them. And in verse 3, then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has risen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor among his dominion for his dominion for which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. Now again, in previous visions, it was a horn that was taken out by other horns. And here he's laying this out again, telling Daniel what's going to take place. And what happened? Well, Alexander the Great came along. He took over the kingdom, and within 10 years, he took out from all the way from Greece all the way to India, or the border of India, the river Indus. He had conquered everything, and he was going to cross that river and go into India, but all of his soldiers said, you know what, we've had enough. We need to go home. We want to go home, see our families. We're wealthy. Let's go. And so they stopped at that point. And then we know that Alexander died shortly thereafter that. And so here you have this picture, exactly what he says. A mighty king shall arise from Greek. He shall rule with great dominion, do according to his will. And when he has risen, or when he gets to great power, when he has the entire kingdom, he shall fall, be broken, and divided towards the four winds. And after him, you had 40 years of civil war, in the point 6 here, 40 years of civil war that took place, and his children were killed during that time, and then the kingdom was divided into these four kingdoms of Greece, these different kingdoms that were here. Now, two of them, the first two, aren't really mentioned too much. Well, they're not mentioned again really at all in this just chapter. It's the next two, the Seleucus and the Ptolemies, are the ones that are the north and the south. And so they're not listed by name, but they're listed by geography. The northern kingdom was the kingdom had the center in Syria. The southern kingdom had the center in Egypt. And these two are now battling about it. Now, what he's trying to say to the nation is that these are the kingdoms that deal with the Holy Land. Everybody else, don't care. North America, not here. China, Australia, Russia, well, it mentioned a little bit, maybe possibly in Gog and things like that, but nobody really cares in the sense of this because it doesn't have anything to do with Israel. Everything's revolving around that. And so these two kingdoms, the first two kingdoms on this list, they didn't really have much to do with Israel, and so they're kind of doing their own thing, but they aren't really brought into the Bible because they're not about the latter days. They're not about what's happening to the Jews, and that's the story that we are looking at. And so exactly what took place in history is written here, that a mighty king shall arise, and he shall rule with great dominion, do according to his will, and when he is risen up, when he stands up and has power, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity. So his children aren't going to rule, which doesn't make any sense, but that's exactly what took place. Nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, so it's not going to have his power. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. And so he's going to be uprooted in the sense that it's going to be broken up, and it's going to be broken up into these four kingdoms. And so verse 4 is exactly what happens. Now, from the rest of this, all the way to 36, is this battle between Egypt and Syria. And the kings of these two kingdoms of Greece, they're all Greeks, but these two kingdoms that are ruling in these areas are battling over the Holy Land and in the Holy Land. And so, this army from the north would come down and sort of pillage Israel and go down to Egypt, and then they would come up and they'd come from Egypt and pillage Israel again, and it was just this constant flow of armies coming north and south, fighting these battles over the next couple hundred years as they fought over who was going to be in control. But the specifics of it it's almost so specific that it doesn't really even compute that it is prophecy. It's something that is written beforehand. And he says in verse 5, also the king of the south shall become strong. And so he's talking about that which is in the south, as well as one who of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. And so you have the two kingdoms, the north and the south, and these are the two guys, Soter and Nicanor. I'll leave the other names out because I can't pronounce them right anyway. So, and this is exactly what happened. The south began to have power. It had power first, and it had control over the Holy Land up until around Antiochus the Great, who was just before Antiochus Epiphanes, who caused all the trouble for Israel. And so just before that, this great power in the south controlled the promised land, controlled Israel, and over that time he had the dominion over the great land, as it says here. And then what happens in verse 6? Well, and at the end of some years, they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority. And what did they do? Well, the north and south, they were fighting the guy in Babylon. And as they came together, they made a pact, and they went out and fought the king of Babylon, just like it says there, that they would work together. They shall join forces. And once they joined forces, they won against the Babylon. They took over the area, and then the south gave his daughter. The king of the south gave his daughter. Her name was Bernice. He gave his daughter to the king of the north, and as he gave it to her, he made Theos, who was the king at this time, Antiochus II Theos. He had to divorce his wife in order to marry Bernice. And that happened until the king of the south died. And when he died, then Theos divorced Bernice and remarried his wife that he had to divorce before, Laodicea. And what did she do? Well, she killed them both because she didn't like what he did. So you see all this intrigue going on? Well, let's go back to what actually it says. They shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south, Bernice, shall go to the king of the north, Theos, I think his name was. What does it say here? Yeah, Theos. And the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority. Because why? Because he divorced her there very quickly after that. And neither he nor his authority shall stand. Neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up, and with those who brought her. And so even at the beginning, she didn't really side with Egypt. It didn't work like he thought it would, because he didn't side with her. And with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. And so what happened? Well, they didn't really have their strength because Bernice killed them both. And so these two kings, they both were trying to use intrigue and trying to use this girl Bernice to get the power, and it didn't work for either one of them because they both died, and then they took over from that point. And it says in verse 7, but from the branch of her roots, branch of Bernice's roots, what's going to happen? Well, her brother, Ptolemy Ptolemy III, he brings an army against the north, and he takes over the north. So a branch from her roots, which is her brother, is going to rise up in his place, and shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north. And he goes into Jerusalem, and he takes away a lot of the treasure and the idols and the stuff that's going on up there. So he shall go up into the north, the king of the north, go into Syria as well, and take the idols and take all the power away at that time. And he shall continue more than a year than the king of the north. And deal with them. In verse 7 it says, enter the fortress of the king of the north and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt. That's exactly what he did. He plundered their temples, plundered their cities, and took all their gods down to Egypt with their princes, and with the precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So what happened? The king of the north died. The king of the south continued to reign. That's exactly what took place just a few decades later. Also, the king of the north shall come to the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. And so, if you turn over to number 9, it's not necessarily in order in the sense that it gives us this, each one. There's spaces in between. But then this other guy that I can't pronounce, Callinicus, attacked the south, but the sons, he lost. So he brought this army in, just like 9 says, the king of the north shall come to the king of the south. He raises an army, he takes this army down there, and he tries to win. Well, he loses the battle. What happens? The king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the south, but shall return to his own land. That's exactly what took place. He didn't win the battle. However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. You what? Well, his friends, What was his friends? Well, his sons. His sons were the Antiochus. Antiochus the Great was his son, and he took Israel from the south, lost the battle, but kept Egypt down there. And then Antiochus the Great went off and had this huge kingdom again, and then he came back and attacked them over and over again. And this is what he's talking about here. He shall carry the gods captive. In verse 10, however, the sons shall stir up strife. The sons of this king that lost shall stir up strife, assemble a multitude, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. And so that's what took place with Antiochus the Great, who came down and attacked them, just like he said. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and go out and fight with him. And the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of the enemy. Well, what happened? Well, the king of the north, as the king of the north came down and took Israel at this time, he was the guy that took Israel from the south and took it into the kingdom of the north, and there it remained from that time. Well, the king of the south was really angry about that, so he brought his army up to fight. It was 70,000 versus 70,000, and the king of the south won and beat the king of the north, just like it says. He shall be moved with rage. He will go out, the king of the north, will muster a great multitude and lose. And that's what happened. Verse 12. When he was taken away, the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. What happened? Well, Antiochus the Great was really cross. He was angry at what happened, and so he went out and conquered all the lands for the east, all the way over to India, just like his predecessor in the Persian Empire had done. And so he went and did that. He cast down tens of thousands. He killed all kinds of people along the way to do that. For the king of the north will be return and muster a multitude greater, so he's going to come back into the land. He's going to come down into the south again, and he's going to attack them again. What does he do? That's what happens. He comes down after he conquers all of the east. He comes back down and fights the south again. Certainly, and shall certainly come to the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. He brought down even a greater army this time, and he fought the battle that was down there. At the same time that he was having this great success in the battles of the east and having establishing his empire, well, in verse 14 it says, now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. So the king of the north, Antiochus the Great, is off fighting the battles over in the east, and in the south there's all these intrigue, and the people that he thinks he should count on were not really there for him. This Callinicus or whatever. And so he actually was dealing with all this stuff internally of this intrigue and not having people that he could trust and all the rest of it. And so he couldn't really do a lot. And that's what it says. Now in those times, many shall rise up against the king of the south. People rose up during that time of the king of the south and kept him. Violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound, and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. So what happened in verse 15? Well, verse 15, there was a great battle in Israel. The general of the south was losing, and 3 generals tried to save him. But as it says, their choice forces would come from the south, but they would not have strength to resist, and they would lose the battle. And at that time, it took all of Israel at that time, and from that point on, all of Israel then was controlled by the north. And so they had a siege mound. He came and attacked the most fortified city in the area. He built a siege mound, just like it says, and he took the city. The troops sent out and tried to get reinforcements 3 times, and all 3 times that they were destroyed, just as it says in verse 15. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So verse 16, there is this new thing that's going to begin to take place. And this new king is going to come, and he's going to stand in the glorious land, which is Israel. And from this point on, that we're going to speak about this last king, or Antiochus Epiphanes. Because all of this is, Daniel, you can imagine Daniel. When you ever think about, you're reading the Bible, and you're like, I don't know clue what's going on. Like maybe tonight. No idea what's going on, You know what? Neither did Daniel. He didn't know what was happening. He was just writing, he was just writing down what God told him to write, And now we can actually look back, and yes, none of us really are historians like this, and I'm just copying from other people as well. I'm not a historian either, but we're actually being able to lay this besides actual historians who are studying this stuff and saying, this is what's happened, this is what the Bible said is going to happen. This is what happened, this is what the Bible said is going to happen. And he's writing this down, and you think about reading a chapter going, I don't know what's going on. Daniel's writing going, okay, why am I doing this? You ever get to that point going, why am I doing this? There doesn't seem like there's any result. And then find out 10 years later, that's why I went there. That's why I talked to that person. Well, here's Daniel doing that very thing. In fact, he actually asks, Lord, show me, what's this about? And he goes, it's not for you, Daniel. It's not for you. It's for those that are coming afterwards. But I mean, for me, again, I like all the details. I like reading these guys, and it's kind of fun and all the rest of it. But you know what? What's so amazing about this is that it is such history. It is exactly, we can put names to these people of the king of the north. Well, I can't because I can't pronounce their names. But other guys can because they can pronounce their names. And they can put a name. This is what it says. This is what this guy did. This is what this guy did. And they fit this thing incredibly. And the reason this is so important and why it's laid down and why it's important for us to sort of at least know this was all fulfilled, because when he gets to verse 36, he's going to get to a point where that's not been fulfilled yet. And that is still future. And so there's a lot of people who will actually say, well, that's not future. Jesus isn't going to return. My daughter asked me that just recently. Is Jesus really going to come back? And I'm like, yes, he is going to really come back. He's promised it, and we're sitting there explaining what the Bible says about that. And how do you know that's going to happen? Well, because there was a king of the north, and he did, and the king of the south, and he did, and we can look at history, compare it to what the Bible says, and the Bible is exactly right on all of these. I mean, seriously, is it important that this guy would have a daughter, and the daughter wouldn't actually support him? Is that really important to us? It's important that God knows every little detail, and he can actually write it down that he knows exactly what's happening in these situations, so that when we can get to these things that we don't know about, heaven and hell and all the rest of it, you can't test that. But we know that that's also true because he's right in all these other areas as well. And so that's why these things are written in here, even though, as I said, and as you can see through this, it's confusing. We don't always understand it. So in verse 11, the king of the south is moved with rage. In verse 12, when he had taken away the multitude, his heart was lifted up and cast down. Verse 14, now many shall rise up against the king of the south. All of that is exactly what took place until we get to verse 16. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him, and he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. So you're like, what? What's going on here? Well, in as it says over here in verse 17 to 19, Antiochus the Great, he gave his daughter Cleopatra to the king of the south. And he did that in order to sort of get her to sort of turn this young guy. Cleopatra was older, and so he did that so she would be able to influence the king of the south, and he would then have control. What happened? Well, Cleopatra sided on his side, on Egypt's side, the entire time. And so here he's like, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. I mean, is that important, that detail? And yet there it is, and that's exactly what Cleopatra did. She sided with Egypt every single time. And so what happens? He constantly was coming down. Antiochus was upset because he never really fully conquered Egypt. He conquered all the east and all the rest, but he didn't ever really fully conquer Egypt, so he was always mad trying to get down there. But because he didn't fully conquer Egypt in that time, in verse 17, the Romans had come at that time and were protecting Egypt a little bit, and so he's like, well, if you attack Egypt, you're going to fight with the Romans. And he's like, I think I'll go the other direction, and so he went up north, and he went to Greece, which is the coastlands that the next verse talks about. After this, he shall turn his face from Egypt and he shall go up to the coastlands and shall take many. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to the end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. What happens? Well, he goes up into Greece, and again, he meets the Romans up there. And as he's up there with the Roman, he insults the Roman ambassador, saying, none of this is for you, all this from the east is mine. He insults the Roman ambassador. So what happens? Well, the Romans, they go into battle, and they destroy the army. And he gets really upset. Antiochus the Great gets upset, begins to go back. He starts sacking temples and stuff along the way, and he's killed in Elam before he reaches his back. He shall turn back on him, then he shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Wow. A ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end. Then he shall turn his face towards the fortress. That's exactly what took place, and he won't make it. He's going to stumble and fall and not be found. There shall arise in his place, this is where Antiochus Epiphanes comes in. There shall rise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed. So what happens? Well, in between Antiochus the Great and Antiochus Epiphanes is this guy, Philopator. And what does he do? Well, because of his dad losing the battle against the Romans, he is given a tax of 1,000 talents. Every year he has to pay the Romans. So he says, well, I ain't paying that. Who am I going to get it from? Well, let's tax the Jews. And so he taxes the Jews very heavily. He goes into the temple in Jerusalem and begins to take the stuff from Israel, the money and all the rest of it, in order to give it to the Romans. And as soon as he does that, he then is poisoned by one of the guys who was actually in charge of that action, and he dies as well. So in verse 20, this one guy comes. He only lasts for a couple of years, and what happens? Well, he starts a tax. He imposes the taxes on Israel. He goes into the temple, and soon after that, he is destroyed, but not in anger and battle. He didn't die in battle. He didn't die in anger. He was poisoned by one of his guys, exactly like it says would take place. That's what happened. And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give honor, the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So what happens after that? Well, after he is poisoned and he dies, Antiochus Epiphanes is not the actual straight descendant. He wasn't the one who really should take over. There was a couple of young boys that should have taken over at the time. And so he comes back. He was up in Greece at the time. And he comes back and says, I'm going to come down and protect this guy, this young king, so that he will be ruling and reigning. And so I will come down and be his protectorate. What does he do? He comes down and kills him. And in order to take, and he uses intrigue all through the empire, or the empire at the time is quite large at that time, still not Greece and not Egypt, but all to the east. He uses this intrigue, as it says here. He says that he's a vile person. He's not given to honor because he didn't care about honor. He only cared about power. But he shall come in peaceably, because he came in saying that I'm going to be this protector, I'm going to do these good things, I'm going to get this guy in there. He got in there and seized the kingdom, and he kills the descendants and seizes the power, exactly like it says here in Daniel 11:21. And so he then takes over the kingdom. And so what happens after that? Well, he then causes some incredible things to take place. With the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And the prince of the covenant was probably a reference to this high priest Onias, who was murdered in 172 BC by Antiochus Epiphanes. He was actually murdered at that time as well. So he went in like a flood and killed all these different people in order to keep his kingdom, and he killed the high priest who was over the temple at the time. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. And he shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plan against the strongholds, but only for a time. And so he was a guy that would go around and buy his way in. His forefathers and stuff, they would go in and just take what he wanted. He would go in and sort of use money and steal and all the rest of it in order to buy his entrance into different areas of the kingdom and try to win friends with that. And so that's what he would do. He would enter peaceably in the sense that he wouldn't fight. And he shall stir up, verse 25, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against them. And so what happens? Well, he goes against against Egypt again with a very strong army. He makes these covenants, and all during this time, there's lots of these battles going on, and they're constantly saying, "Oh yes, let's make a covenant." And underneath it, they go and attack him again. And there's constant back and forth that's gone on, but Antiochus Epiphanes overtakes slowly and surely of this. And yet in verse 26, yet those who eat the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him and his army and be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. He was killed by his own people. But both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil. So the king of the south and Antiochus Epiphanes will be bent on evil. They shall speak lies at the table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. And so here they are, they're trying to, they're both using intrigue, lying, and all the rest of it. They're sitting at the same table, they're trying to kill each other, but when God says it's done, it's done. Or returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, and so he shall be damaged and return to his own land. At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former at the latter, for ships again from Cyprus, which is the Romans, shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. And so he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And so again, because he got turned away there, he goes back into Israel and he begins to persecute the Jews. And this is where we have all that goes on in the time of the Maccabees, 1 and 2 Maccabees that took place. He desecrated the altar. He offered a pig on the altar. He proclaimed himself as God. He killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. He did turn some of the people against each other. Some of them turned towards him and were helping him. But at the same time, because of the utter destruction he was causing, he actually caused a revival to take place in Israel, and there was this great a bunch of zealots that saw this and said, we don't want anything to do with that, and they rose up and they fought against him. And so even though he was this horrible guy, persecuted and killed thousands, he also caused the nation of Israel to be even more pure during that time, and incredible zealots went out and did some great things during that. You can read all about that as well. It's all part of history as well. And his forces shall be mustered, in verse 32, that those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery. So he's going to corrupt some, as it says, but the people who know their God shall be strong. So this is what I'm talking about. That some will be corrupt with flattery, but others, there'll be this great revival that will take place towards the temple and towards the Jewish faith, and they'll have these great exploits that will take place. And those are the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. I'm just going to read some of this stuff because it's history. There's a lot of details in here, but yeah. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, to purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So he ends here with this idea of the time of the end. And so you have this picture of Antiochus Epiphanes that took place during this period of time. Many of the Jews turned, but far more of them actually fought against them and won many battles during that season and that time, as the great exploits took place that you can read about in history. So in verse 36, so far it has tracked exactly like history. I mean, everything is just perfect to what history says it's going to be. Now when you get to 36, it doesn't. All of a sudden it changes. And now people are grasping from 36 onwards, trying to figure out where these things took place. And there's different explanations, as it says here on my sheet, that, the first one is that Antiochus sort of loosely fulfilled them. But yet, all these other ones are absolutely specific. And now they're trying to fit it all in. And so and you can read a lot of the Christian commentators that you would normally read, will look and they'll try to do that. Some of the older guys, a few 100 years ago, 200 years ago, they'll write about that kind of stuff and they'll try to fit that stuff in. Others say, well, this is perfect point where this guy actually wasn't that great of a historian, and he was just making this up. He was just trying to add stuff to it. Or he didn't really understand the fullness of history, and so he couldn't get these things specific because he had lost it. But the majority of people today actually are where I would hope that all of us would be, that this stuff isn't really historical yet. Because he stops it here until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Now there seems to be a change. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. Now Antiochus did that, but he didn't do according to his own will all the time. It doesn't quite fit to what happened. Against the God of gods and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, a god which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. So this is the part that none of that really fits with what he does. Verse 39, thus he shall act against the strongest fortress with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. None of that really fits. And so most of us would agree that this is something that's still future. In Daniel's perspective, all of it's future. So he is just speaking all of it future, and now where we are, we're looking back on some of it, and some of it we're not looking back on. And this verse 36 and onwards is all still future. So what does it say? Well, there's going to come this king, and he's going to rise, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself against every god. He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. That's always a good one to underline, isn't it? What has been determined shall be done. He's already said a couple of times, the appointed time. Verse 27, verse 35, it is still for the appointed time. That God has these things under control. He knows exactly what's going to take place, and he is going to do it. Verse 37, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. Now this is speaking about what we believe is the Antichrist, this guy that's going to come. He's going to rise, and he is going to neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. So because of this verse, there are some, and it's interesting, I'm not sure if I hold that, but it's interesting, that this guy the Antichrist is going to be Jewish, because he is not regarding the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. The desire of women, again, has been explained in several different ways. The desire of women, for some, is that he was a homosexual. Others is that the desire of women, that every Jewish woman of the day wanted to be the mother of the Messiah. And because he did not care for the Messiah, the desire of women was, of the Jewish women, was that they would give birth to the Messiah, and therefore he didn't care about that in any way. That's a possibility as well. We're not exactly sure on what others think it's another god, Humos, which doesn't make any sense really, but some hold to that as well. But he shall neither regard the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. Now that could be lots of different things. It doesn't necessarily mean the God of his fathers as in something that the way the Bible would say that, or a God that his fathers worship. Now, the reason I put this stuff in here about the atheism is that this is a brand new thing. I don't know if we realize that, but leaders today that are atheists, that's not something that's been in history, really, that we've had leaders of Europe that are atheists. They live atheistic lives, yes, that God doesn't really see and act, but they claimed that they worshipped the God of the Bible or the Roman beliefs or something like that. It's only today we're having leaders that are actually saying that they are atheists, that they have nothing to do with it, they don't like this. And so it could be that it's speaking about this rise of atheism. That's what some are saying about that. Others are looking at it being that he's going to come from Islam. Now the question is, why I'm saying all these things is because if this is still future, we don't fully know. These are just hypotheses. These are ideas that people have of what is going to take place, what it might be. It's interesting as you see this. I mean, the guy in Greece, this Alexis Pros, I don't know how to say his name, who is the prime minister of Greece now. He wouldn't take a religious oath. He was the first guy in Greece that would not take a religious oath. He's an atheist, and he would not do that. And so you see this rise of not worshiping like their fathers. And so it could be something like that. It could be that type of thing that it might be speaking of. Or it might be that this guy actually, the Antichrist, is going to be Jewish. It could be that as well. But in verse 38 it says, "But in that place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which the fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things." Again, there's lots of ideas about what that means. Many think that it's the idea of materialism, in the sense that there isn't really a God. Everybody, when you went to battle before, you would worship whatever God that was the battle, that was the God of armor and fighting and all the rest of it. And in this case, he's going to worship something else, in the sense that it's going to be the weapons themselves. Again, these are all ideas, but we don't really know exactly because it's all future. In verse 39, he says, "Thus he shall act against the strongest fortress with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge in advance of glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for great gain." So again, he's speaking about the nation of Israel. In verse 40, "At that time, at the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, and with chariots, horsemen, with many ships, and he shall enter the countries and overwhelm them and pass through." So what's going on here? Well, it seems at this time, there's going to be this time where the Antichrist is going to rule. That's what it says. In verse 36, "The king shall do according to his own will." The Antichrist is going to rule. He's going to rule the world. No one's going to get in his way. But as time goes on, there's going to be this fracturing that happens in the political system, I guess, or the power system. And you're going to have the north, you're going to have the south, you're going to have the east. You're going to have them all coming together against the Antichrist, and they're going to come together there in the Holy Land, as it says at the end of verse 40. "At the end of the time of the end, the king of the south," which is Egypt and Africa possibly, "shall attack him. The king of the north," most would think that's probably Russia coming down against them, shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen, many ships, and he shall enter the countries and overwhelm them and pass through. And he shall also enter the glorious land," again, the nation of Israel, "and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon." Now, where are those places? Well, those are right here. If you can see that, you have the Dead Sea right there in the middle. You have Israel on the left side. You have Edom, Moab, and Ammon right there on the right side. Now, if you throw a quick map on the other next to it, you have what we call today, which is Jordan. So it looks like Jordan's going to be kept from that. Why? Well, because most would look at the rock city of Petra being in Jordan is going to be where the Jews are going to flee during that time of persecution. Once the Antichrist is going to come and do almost exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes does, this forerunner of the Antichrist, he's going to come and he's going to desecrate the temple. And when he desecrates the temple, the Jews are going to run into the wilderness. And most think that they're going to the rock city of Petra, which is in Jordan, which here it says Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon will not fall into the destruction of the Antichrist. Interesting stuff, isn't it? "He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape." So he will go and he will take over Egypt, but he won't touch Jordan. "He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. That he shall come to his end, and no one will help him." So what is he going to do? Well, he's going to be down in Egypt fighting a battle. He's going to hear of another army that's going to be coming from the east. What does the Bible say? Well, there's going to be the Euphrates are going to dry up, and a 200 million man army is going to come from the east. Well, China can field that now. Throughout history, there's been different ideas about all of these pictures here. That it could be that 200-man army is an angel army against him. But actually, China can field a 200 million man army now. So it could be very much that the armies from the east are coming across the plain and attacking from it. From the north, they're going to meet. And they're going to meet right there. As it says, they are going to meet where? Well, they will meet in the promised land. They shall meet between, in verse 45, he shall put up his tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, Jerusalem. He's going to put him right there, and that's where the battle is going to take place. We know is Armageddon. What's going to take place? Well, Jesus, we're told that Jesus is going to come in Zechariah 14, that he's going to come, he's going to land on the Mount of Olives. You can read about these different things here in these scriptures that I put at the end. And he's going to land on the Mount of Olives, and he's going to destroy the armies of the Antichrist at one time. All the armies of the world will meet together at that place to fight a sort of a civil war type thing, and then they will all turn their weapons upon Christ, and he will destroy them all with the word of his mouth, the sword that comes forth from his mouth. And so how do we know that's going to take place? I mean, that seems so far-fetched. I mean, that's ridiculous. Sky, horses coming down, Mount of Olives splitting and a river coming forth. And come on, Bryce, that's ridiculous. Well, yeah, but it was kind of ridiculous that you could call all this other stuff too. And I think that's why there's such specificity on this chapter about why and how we can know that this also is going to come to pass. So that you and I, as he says, be strong. Remember, he says that in the beginning of all this. He's going to lay it all out, and he doesn't say understand it, he just says be strong. I'm speaking to you. I'm going to lay my hands on you, and you carry out the work of laying this before us. When you put all these things together, you put Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 and Daniel, the different visions and the rock coming and destroying and all of that. I mean, that's what it says in verse 45. Yet he shall come to his end and no one shall help him. What's going to happen? Well, Jesus is going to come and destroy them all. No one's going to help him. Exactly like the Bible says. Revelation 19 speaks about this. Daniel's talked about it a couple times already. We can see these things coming to pass. Now, chapter 12, if you're like me, you're like, whew, that's enough, and I think it is enough because it's really back and forth. And as you read through it and go through what's been said on the paper, you can hopefully put these things together a bit better. There's lots of books and stuff you can study on the internet as well that explain all these things to you. But again, this is probably why this chapter is often looked over, because it is confusing. But how specific it is should blow our minds of what God is saying about the future. When he speaks, this is going to take place. All that's going to come in the future, God is promising. And now I love this in verse 41. He has this place of protection for the nation. That here in Daniel, he speaks about it, and in the New Testament, he talks about it. In Isaiah 63, again, he reiterates it. All through, he speaks about this place of protection for the nation of Israel. God is going to protect his people. He's going to be with them, even though they're going to go through this horrible and trying time at the end. As we get closer to this, what's amazing is that you can actually begin to see these things take place, can't you? You begin to see these things happen. The 200 million man army, check. Russia down into Syria, check. Iran and Russia in beginning to work together. Not beginning, they are working together with Syria, check. And you go through all these different checklists, what needs to take place for this to happen, and you can say, check, 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 all the way through. We don't know when this is going to happen, but we do know is that God wants us to be strong. He wants us to keep living out our faith, trusting him, and understanding that he's moving in and through our lives. When it's the appointed time, I think that's what I go back to when I look through this, at the appointed time. God knows exactly when it's going to take place. Let's trust him and continue to live for him. Father, we want to thank you for your word. We want to thank you for something that, Lord, this